The rope burned against Willow Vance's wrists as she stood trembling on the wooden platform in the center of Black Hawk, Colorado. Summer sun beating down mercilessly on her bare shoulders in the scorching heat of July 1878. She had never imagined her life would come to this, bound like livestock, displayed before a crowd of leering men who saw her not as a person, but as property to be bought and sold. The auctioneer's voice droned on, listing her supposed virtues while her heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. She was 22 years old, and everything she had known had been stripped away in a matter of weeks. Her father had been a gambler, a terrible one, and when he died 3 months ago, his debts had fallen onto her shoulders like a crushing weight. The men he owed money to had no interest in her explanations or her tears. They wanted payment, and when she could not provide it, they decided she would settle the debt in another way. Indentured servitude, they called it, though the word felt too clean for what this actually was. They had tied her to this auction block in the middle of town, advertising her as a worker who could cook, clean, and tend to whatever needs a man might have. The implications made her stomach turn. The crowd gathered closer, their faces a blur of sun-weathered skin and calculating eyes. Some looked curious, others hungry in a way that made her want to disappear into herself. The auctioneer called for bids, and she heard numbers being thrown out like she was nothing more than a horse or a piece of furniture. Shame burned hotter than the Colorado sun, and she blinked back tears, refusing to let them see her cry. That was when she saw him. A tall cowboy pushed through the crowd, his hat pulled low over his eyes, dust covering his worn leather chaps and dark shirt. There was something different about the way he moved, purposeful and steady, like a man who knew exactly what he intended to do. He stopped at the edge of the platform, and when he lifted his head, Willow caught sight of his face. Strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble, dark eyes that held a fierce intensity, and an expression that looked equal parts angry and determined. Duncan Cole had ridden into Black Hawk that morning with no intention of getting involved in anyone's troubles. He had been traveling through, heading toward Denver to meet up with a cattle drive crew that needed experienced hands. He had money in his pocket from his last job, enough to see him through to the next one, and he had learned long ago that staying out of other people's business was the best way to stay alive in the West. But then he had heard the commotion in the town square and had made the mistake of looking. The sight of the woman tied to that platform, ropes binding her wrists, her face pale with fear and humiliation, had stopped him cold. He had seen a lot of ugly things in his 30 years, but this ranked among the worst. The practice was not unheard of, people selling themselves or being sold to pay off debts, but that did not make it right. And something about the way she held her head up despite her terror, the way she refused to look away from the crowd even though every instinct must be screaming at her to hide, struck something deep in his chest. Before he fully realized what he was doing, Duncan was pushing through the crowd. His hand went to the knife at his belt, fingers curling around the worn leather handle. The auctioneer was in the middle of calling out a bid when Duncan hauled himself up onto the platform in one smooth motion. The crowd fell silent. Willow's eyes went wide as the cowboy strode directly toward her, his boots heavy on the wooden planks. For a terrifying moment, she thought he was another bidder, come to inspect his potential purchase. But then he pulled the knife from his belt, and the crowd gasped. The auctioneer stumbled backward, hands raised. Duncan did not even look at the man. He moved behind Willow, and she felt the cool press of steel against her wrists. One quick motion, and the ropes fell away. Blood rushed back into her hands, bringing with it 1,000 pinpricks of sensation. She gasped, stumbling slightly, and Duncan's hand steadied her elbow. "You are free," he said, his voice low and rough, meant only for her ears. "Stay close to me." The crowd erupted. Men shouted in outrage, pushing forward toward the platform. The auctioneer found his voice, screaming about theft and the law. Several men who had been bidding looked furious, their investments disappearing before their eyes. Duncan turned to face them, keeping Willow behind him, his knife still in his hand. "This is wrong, and you all know it," he called out, his voice carrying over the angry shouts. "She is a person, not property. I will not stand here and watch this happen." "You got no right," someone yelled from the crowd. "She owes a debt." "Then let her work it off with wages and dignity," Duncan shot back. "Not like this." A burly man with a cruel face pushed to the front of the crowd. Willow recognized him immediately. Silas Mercer, one of the men her father had owed money to, the one who had orchestrated this entire nightmare. His face was purple with rage. "That woman belongs to us until the debt is paid," Mercer snarled. "You cut her loose, you are stealing. We can hang you for that, Cowboy." Duncan's expression did not change. "You can try." The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. Willow could see other men in the crowd reaching for their guns, and terror clawed at her throat. This stranger was going to get himself killed because of her. She grabbed his arm. "Please," she whispered. "Do not do this. They will hurt you." He glanced back at her, and for just a moment his hard expression softened. "Trust me." Before anyone could make a move, a new voice cut through the chaos. "What in blazes is going on here?" The crowd parted reluctantly as Sheriff Thomas Hammond pushed his way through, his weathered face creased with irritation. He was an older man, somewhere in his 60s, with gray hair and a permanent squint from years under the sun. He looked at the scene on the platform with the expression of a man who had seen too much foolishness in his lifetime. "Sheriff, this man cut loose our property," Mercer said quickly, pointing an accusing finger at Duncan. "We want him arrested." Hammond's eyes moved from Mercer to Duncan to Willow, taking in her torn dress, her raw wrists, the fear in her eyes. His mouth pressed into a thin line. "She ain't property, Mercer," the sheriff said flatly. "And you know it." "Her father owed us money," another man called out. $2,000. She agreed to work it off." "I never agreed to anything." Willow found her voice, surprising herself with its strength. "You told me this was the only way. You said if I refused, you would have me arrested for fraud." Sheriff Hammond's expression darkened. "That true, Mercer?" "She is lying," Mercer said quickly, but there was sweat on his forehead now. "I do not think she is," Hammond said. He looked at Duncan. "You, Cowboy, you got a name, Duncan Cole." "Well, Mr. Cole, I appreciate your sense of justice, but pulling a knife in the middle of town square is a good way to start a bloodbath. You understand that?" "I understand plenty, Sheriff," Duncan said evenly. "I also understand that what was happening here was wrong." Hammond was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Cannot say I disagree with you." He turned to address the crowd. "This auction is over. The girl is free to go." The crowd exploded with protests, but Hammond raised his hand, his other hand resting pointedly on his gun. "I said it is over." "Mercer, you and your boys want to take issue with that, you can try. But I am telling you right now, any man who lays a hand on this woman or Mr. Cole here is going to be answering to me. Now clear out." For a tense moment, it could have gone either way. Mercer's face was twisted with fury, and several men looked ready to fight. But Hammond was well respected, and more importantly, he had deputies stationed around the square who were now moving forward with their hands on their weapons. Slowly, reluctantly, the crowd began to disperse, though not without plenty of muttering and dark looks thrown in Duncan's and Willow's direction. Mercer pushed his way through the crowd and stopped directly in front of the platform, staring up at Willow with eyes full of venom. "This is not over, girl," he said quietly. "That debt does not just disappear. You will pay what is owed one way or another." Duncan moved to the edge of the platform, putting himself between Mercer and Willow. "You heard the sheriff. Move along." Mercer held his gaze for a long moment, then spat into the dirt and stalked away. When the square had finally cleared, Sheriff Hammond gestured for them to come down from the platform. Duncan jumped down first, then turned and offered Willow his hand. She hesitated only a moment before taking it, letting him help her down. Her legs felt unsteady, and the world seemed to tilt slightly. The fear and adrenaline that had been holding her upright were draining away, leaving her shaky and light-headed. "You all right, miss?" Hammond asked, his voice gentler now. "I think so," Willow said, though she was not entirely sure that was true. Hammond looked at Duncan. "That was a damn fool thing you did, son." "Probably," Duncan agreed. "Could have gotten yourself killed." "Probably that too." Hammond shook his head, but there was something almost like approval in his eyes. "Where you planning to go now?" Because Mercer was not just blowing smoke. "He's going to cause trouble for both of you if you stay in town." Duncan had not thought that far ahead, but he knew the sheriff was right. "I was heading to Denver." "Miss Vance," Hammond looked at Willow. "You got family anywhere, somewhere you can go?" Willow shook her head slowly. "No, my mother died when I was young and my father was all I had. There is no one else." The reality of her situation was sinking in now. She was free from the auction block, but she had nowhere to go, no money, no prospects. She was arguably in a worse position than she had been an hour ago. At least then, horrible as it was, she would have had a roof over her head and food in her belly. Now she had nothing. Duncan saw the despair creeping into her expression, and felt that same protective instinct flare in his chest again. He barely knew this woman, had no obligation to her beyond what he had already done, but he could not just walk away and leave her stranded. "She can come with me to Denver," he heard himself say. "I can help her find work there, somewhere to stay." Willow's head snapped up, her blue eyes wide with surprise. "You do not have to do that." "I know I do not have to," Duncan said, "but I am offering. You do not even know me." "I know enough." Sheriff Hammond looked between them, then nodded. "Might be the best option, miss. Black Hawk is not going to be safe for you, not with Mercer stirring up trouble. Denver is bigger, more opportunities, and you can get lost in the crowd there. Mercer would have a harder time tracking you down." Willow looked at Duncan, really looked at him, trying to read what kind of man he was. She had grown up learning to assess people quickly. Her father's gambling habit had taught her that. She looked for the telltale signs of meanness or dishonesty, the little ticks that revealed true character. But all she saw in Duncan's face was a steady, quiet strength and a hint of something that might have been kindness. "Why are you helping me?" she asked quietly. Duncan was quiet for a moment, then shrugged slightly. "Because it is the right thing to do." It was not a grand declaration, not flowery words or empty promises. It was simple and honest, and somehow that made Willow believe him. She took a shaky breath and nodded. "All right, thank you." Hammond gave them some supplies from the general store on credit, things Willow would need for the journey, and warned them to leave town quickly. Mercer had influence, and while Hammond could keep order for now, he could not guarantee what might happen after dark. Duncan retrieved his horse from the livery, a sturdy bay gelding named Rusty, and they left Black Hawk within the hour. The ride to Denver would take 2 days, maybe 3 depending on the weather and how often they stopped. Duncan kept a steady pace, not pushing too hard but making good distance. Willow rode behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist, and tried not to think about how close she was to this stranger, this man who had upended his own life to save hers. They did not talk much that first day. Duncan was not much for conversation anyway, and Willow was too overwhelmed by everything that had happened to make small talk. But as the sun began to sink toward the mountains and Duncan guided them off the main trail toward a spot where they could make camp for the night, Willow felt the questions bubbling up inside her. Duncan built a fire while Willow sat on a fallen log, watching him work. He moved with practiced efficiency, gathering kindling, arranging stones for a fire ring, striking flint to catch a spark. Within minutes, a cheerful blaze was crackling between them. He pulled some dried meat and hardtack from his saddlebags, not much but enough to take the edge off their hunger. "Here," he said, handing her a portion. "Thank you." Willow took it, nibbling at the tough meat. It was not much, but it was more than she had expected to have tonight. "Mr. Cole, Duncan," he interrupted gently. "Just Duncan." "Duncan," she said, testing the name on her tongue. "I do not know how to repay you for what you have done. You do not owe me anything. I owe you my life." Duncan shook his head, settling onto the ground across the fire from her. "You do not owe me that either. I did what any decent person should have done." "But they did not," Willow said quietly. "All those people in that square they just watched. Some of them even bid on me. You were the only one who did anything." Duncan did not have an answer for that. He had seen the worst and the best of humanity in his years on the frontier. He had seen people do terrible things to each other for money, for land, for power, or sometimes for no reason at all. But he had also seen extraordinary acts of kindness and courage. He tried to be the kind of man who did right when he could, even when it cost him something. "Tell me about yourself," he said, changing the subject. "What happened that led to today?" Willow was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "My father was a gambler, not a good one. He thought he could beat the odds, make a fortune at the card tables. Instead, he just lost everything we had and then borrowed more. When he died, he left me with nothing but his debts. The men he owed money to came to collect, and when I could not pay, they said I could work it off. I thought they meant as a maid or a cook in one of their businesses. I did not realize they meant to sell me like that until they dragged me to that platform." Her voice cracked on the last words, and she pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to hold back the tears. Duncan felt anger flare hot in his chest, not at her but at the men who had done this, at her father for being so reckless, at a world that allowed such things to happen. "You are safe now," he said quietly. "I promise you that." Willow looked up at him, tears glistening on her cheeks in the firelight. "How can you promise that? You do not even know me. I could be trouble. I probably am trouble, considering Mercer's threats." "I do not care about Mercer or his threats," Duncan said flatly. "And I do not need to know your whole life story to know you did not deserve what they tried to do to you. No one does." The conviction in his voice made something inside Willow's chest loosen, just a little. She had spent so long feeling alone, feeling like the weight of her father's mistakes was hers to carry by herself. Having someone, even a stranger, say so simply that she mattered, that what happened to her was wrong, made her feel like maybe she was not completely lost after all. "What about you?" she asked, wiping at her eyes. "What is your story?" Duncan shrugged, poking at the fire with a stick. "Not much to tell. I grew up on a ranch in Texas, learned to rope and ride young. My family lost everything in a bad winter when I was 17. After that, I have been moving around, working cattle drives, breaking horses, doing whatever work I can find. It is not a fancy life, but it is mine." "Do you have family still?" "A sister in San Antonio. We write when we can, but I have not seen her in a few years. She got married to a merchant, has a couple of kids now. Good life." "Do you miss her?" Duncan considered the question. "Sometimes, but she is happy, and that is what matters." They fell into a comfortable silence after that, the crackle of the fire and the distant sounds of the wilderness filling the space between them. Willow found herself studying Duncan in the firelight, noticing details she had missed before. The scar on his left hand, faded white against his tanned skin. The way his shoulders carried a kind of weariness that spoke of hard years and long roads. The gentleness in his eyes when he looked at her, so at odds with his rough exterior. She should have been terrified, alone in the wilderness with a man she did not know. But somehow, she felt safer than she had in months, when the fire burned low and exhaustion pulled at both of them. Duncan gave Willow his bedroll and took his saddle blanket for himself. She protested, but he waved her off. "You have been through hell today," he said simply. "Take the bedroll." Willow wanted to argue more, but she was too tired. She wrapped herself in the blanket, and despite everything, despite the fear and uncertainty and the strangeness of her situation, she fell asleep almost immediately. Duncan lay awake longer, staring up at the stars scattered across the vast Colorado sky. He thought about the look in Willow's eyes when he had cut those ropes, the way she had whispered "thank you" like he had given her the world. He thought about how her arms had felt wrapped around his waist during the ride, how natural it had seemed despite them being strangers. He barely knew this woman, but already she had gotten under his skin in a way he could not quite explain. He told himself it was just the circumstances, the drama of the rescue, but deep down he suspected it was more than that. There was something about Willow Vance that called to him, something in her strength despite her fear, her refusal to give up even when everything was stacked against her. This was going to get complicated. He could feel it. But as he finally drifted off to sleep, Duncan found he did not mind as much as he probably should have. They woke with the sun and continued their journey toward Denver. The landscape changed gradually as they rode, the rugged mountains giving way to rolling hills and eventually to the flatter terrain that surrounded the growing city. They talked more on this second day, the initial awkwardness between them fading into something easier. Willow told him about her childhood, about her mother who had died of fever when Willow was only 10, about how she had essentially raised herself while her father chased his next big win. Duncan told her about life on cattle drives, about sleeping under stars for weeks at a time, about the strange beauty of watching a herd of longhorns move like a river across the plains. They discovered small things about each other. Willow had never learned to shoot a gun, something Duncan promised to teach her when they had time. Duncan had never learned to read very well, something that embarrassed him until Willow offered to help him practice. They both loved horses and thunderstorms and the smell of coffee in the morning. By the time they made camp that second night, the wall between them had crumbled significantly. They were not quite friends yet. Too much was still uncertain for that, but they were something. Allies, maybe, or the beginning of something neither was ready to name. Duncan taught Willow how to properly build a fire that night, showing her how to arrange the wood so air could feed the flames. Their hands brushed as she took kindling from him, and both of them felt the spark of that contact, though neither acknowledged it. "You are a good teacher," Willow said as the fire caught and grew. "You are a quick learner," Duncan replied. They ate another sparse meal, and Duncan promised that when they reached Denver, he would buy them both a proper dinner. Willow laughed at that, the first time he had heard her really laugh, and the sound made something warm bloom in his chest. "I would like that," she said. As they settled in for the night, Willow asked the question that had been nagging at her. "What happens when we get to Denver? I mean, really. I have no money, no skills that anyone would pay for. I can cook and clean, but so can plenty of other women. What am I going to do?" Duncan had been thinking about that question himself. There are boarding houses in Denver that are always looking for help, and restaurants, hotels, laundries. It is a growing city, lots of opportunity. We will find you something. And then what? You go off to your cattle drive and I am on my own again. The thought of leaving her made Duncan's stomach tighten unpleasantly. If that is what you want. I do not know what I want, Willow admitted. A week ago, I thought I knew my life, even if it was not a great one. Now everything has changed, and I feel like I am floating without an anchor. Duncan understood that feeling. He had felt it himself at 17 when his family lost everything. Sometimes the ground has to shift before you can find where you are really supposed to be standing. Willow looked at him in the firelight, at his serious face and his kind eyes, and felt something shift inside her chest. This man had saved her life without even knowing her. He had risked himself for a stranger, and now he was helping her find her feet in a world that had tried to crush her. She did not believe in love at first sight, but she was beginning to believe in something, a connection that went deeper than circumstances or convenience. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything, for not just riding past that square, for caring when you did not have to." Duncan met her eyes across the fire. "You do not have to keep thanking me, Willow, I know, but I want to." They held each other's gaze for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then Willow looked away, her cheeks flushing slightly, and Duncan busied himself with adjusting the fire. Neither was quite ready to name what was growing between them, but both could feel it, steady and sure as the sunrise. They reached Denver late the next afternoon. The city was bustling with activity, a far cry from the smaller mining towns they had passed through. Buildings lined the wide streets, some brick, some wood, all of them humming with commerce and noise. People rushed past on foot and on horseback, and the air smelled of dust and horses and possibility. Duncan found them a modest but clean boarding house run by a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Fletcher. He paid for 2 rooms, despite Willow's protests, and arranged for them to have a hot meal in the dining room. Willow nearly cried when she saw the bathroom with its copper tub and the promise of hot water. After 2 days on the trail and the nightmare before that, the thought of being truly clean felt like heaven. That evening, after they had both bathed and changed into the cleanest clothes they had, they met in the boarding house dining room. Duncan barely recognized Willow when she came down the stairs. With the dust and fear washed away, she was beautiful. Her dark blonde hair fell in soft waves past her shoulders, and her blue eyes seemed brighter now. She wore a simple dress that Mrs. Fletcher had lent her, and she looked younger somehow, less burdened. Willow felt her breath catch when she saw Duncan. He had cleaned up well, his dark hair combed back, his jaw freshly shaved. Without the trail dust and the tension of their journey, he looked different. Handsome in a rough-hewn sort of way, with strong features and those dark eyes that seemed to see right through her. They ate dinner together, a real meal of beef stew and fresh bread and vegetables that tasted like the best thing either of them had ever eaten. They talked and laughed, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, Willow felt something like hope taking root in her chest. After dinner, Duncan walked Willow to her room. They stood in the hallway, suddenly awkward now that they were in a proper building with doors and walls and separate spaces. "Tomorrow I will help you look for work," Duncan said. "There is a hotel down the street that was advertising for housekeeping staff, and a restaurant that needed a cook." "What about your cattle drive?" Willow asked. "When are you supposed to meet them?" Duncan had been thinking about that. The truth was, the drive would go on with or without him. He had not made any binding commitments, had only said he might show up if the timing worked. And right now, the thought of leaving Denver, of leaving Willow, made his chest ache in a way he did not fully understand. "They can wait," he said. "Or they can get someone else. I am not leaving until I know you are settled and safe." Willow felt tears prick at her eyes again. "You have already done so much for me. I know. But I want to make sure you are really okay before I go anywhere." She stepped closer to him, close enough that he could smell the soap she had used, could see the flecks of gray in her blue eyes. "What if I do not want you to go?" Duncan's heart kicked hard against his ribs. "What? What if I want you to stay?" Willow said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not because I need protection or help finding work, but because I want you to. Because these last few days, even though they have been hard and scary, have also been the most alive I have felt in years. Because when I am with you, I feel like maybe I can figure out who I am supposed to be." Duncan stared at her, his mind racing. He should tell her it was too soon, that they barely knew each other, that she was just grateful and confused. He should put distance between them before this became something messy and complicated. But when he looked into her eyes, all he could think about was how right it had felt to have her arms around him on the ride, how her laugh had made him want to find ways to make her laugh again, how the thought of leaving her made him feel hollow. "I do not want to go either," he admitted quietly. "But Willow, you have been through a lot. You do not have to make decisions about this right now. Take some time, get your feet under you, figure out what you really want." "I know what I want," Willow said with more certainty than she had felt about anything in a long time. "I want a chance to see where this goes, whatever this is between us." Duncan reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and cupped her face in his calloused hand. "Are you sure?" "I am sure." He leaned down and kissed her, soft and gentle, like she was something precious that might break. Willow's eyes fluttered closed, and she rose on her toes to meet him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. The kiss was sweet and tentative, a question and an answer all at once. When they pulled apart, both of them were breathing a little harder. Duncan rested his forehead against hers. "We will take this slow," he said. "You still need to find work, build a life here. I will find work too, stay in Denver for a while. We will see how things go." Willow nodded, a smile spreading across her face. "I would like that." Duncan kissed her once more, quick and light, then forced himself to step back before he did something foolish like pull her into his room and never let her go. "Good night, Willow." "Good night, Duncan." She slipped into her room, and Duncan stood in the hallway for a long moment, his heart pounding, a smile he could not quite suppress tugging at his lips. He had come to Black Hawk with no intention of getting involved in anyone's troubles, and now here he was, halfway to falling in love with a woman he had known for less than a week. Life had a strange sense of humor sometimes. Over the following weeks, Duncan and Willow built a life in Denver. Willow found work at the hotel Duncan had mentioned, starting as housekeeping staff, but quickly proving herself capable and hardworking. The pay was modest but fair, and it came with one meal a day and a small room in the hotel's attic that was hers alone. It was not much, but it was honest work, and it was hers. No one owned her, no one could take it away. Duncan found work at a ranch just outside Denver, breaking horses and helping with general ranch work. The owner, a gruff but fair man named Robert Carter, appreciated Duncan's skills and offered him steady employment. Duncan kept his room at the boarding house in town so he could spend his evenings with Willow. They fell into a routine. Duncan would finish work and ride into town, and they would have dinner together, sometimes at the boarding house, sometimes at a small restaurant they had discovered that served amazing apple pie. They would walk through Denver's streets as the sun set, talking about their days, their dreams, their pasts. They learned each other slowly, carefully, building trust brick by brick. Duncan taught Willow to shoot, taking her out to a clearing beyond the city limits and showing her how to hold a pistol, how to aim, how to breathe through the shot. She was terrible at first, flinching every time the gun went off, but Duncan was patient. Eventually, she hit a tin can on her third try and let out a whoop of joy that made Duncan laugh so hard he had to sit down. Willow helped Duncan with his reading, sitting with him in the boarding house parlor with newspapers and dime novels, sounding out words and helping him piece together sentences. He was embarrassed at first, ashamed of his lack of education, but Willow never made him feel stupid. She just worked with him, encouraging him when he got frustrated, celebrating when he managed to read a whole paragraph on his own. They grew closer with every passing day. Stolen kisses in shadowed doorways became longer embraces. Held hands during walks became arms wrapped around waists. The careful distance they had maintained at first dissolved into something warmer, something that felt like coming home. 2 months after they arrived in Denver, Duncan asked Willow to marry him. It was not a grand proposal. They were sitting by the creek that ran through the edge of town, watching the water catch the late afternoon light. Willow had been telling him about a difficult guest at the hotel, and Duncan had been only half listening, too caught up in watching the way the sun turned her hair to gold. "Marry me," he said suddenly, interrupting her mid-sentence. Willow stopped talking and stared at him. "What, marry me?" Duncan repeated, his heart hammering. "I know it has not been that long, and maybe I am crazy, but I love you, Willow. I think I have loved you since the moment I saw you on that platform, refusing to give up even when everything was stacked against you. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night. I want to face whatever comes with you by my side, so marry me." Willow felt tears streaming down her face before she even realized she was crying. "Yes, yes, of course yes." Duncan pulled her into his arms and kissed her, deep and desperate and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were grinning like fools. "I do not have a ring," Duncan admitted. "I will get you one, I promise, but I could not wait any longer to ask." "I do not need a ring," Willow said, laughing through her tears. "I just need you." They were married 3 weeks later in a small church in Denver. Mrs. Fletcher and Sheriff Hammond, who had traveled from Black Hawk when Duncan sent him a letter, stood as witnesses. Willow wore a simple white dress that she had sewn herself, and Duncan wore his best shirt and a new vest. It was not fancy, but it was perfect. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Duncan kissed Willow like she was the air he needed to breathe. The small gathering cheered, and Willow felt a joy so complete it was almost frightening. She had gone from being auctioned like property to being cherished as a wife in the span of a few months. It felt like a dream, but it was real. Duncan was real, solid, and steady beside her. They spent their wedding night in a nicer hotel than the boarding house, a small luxury they had saved up for. Duncan was gentle with Willow, patient and careful, making sure she felt safe and wanted. They explored each other slowly, learning what made the other gasp or sigh, building heat between them until they moved together in the ancient rhythm of new lovers. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sheets, Willow's head on Duncan's chest, his fingers trailing through her hair. "I never thought I could be this happy," Willow whispered. Duncan kissed the top of her head. "Me neither." "What do we do now?" "Now we build the life we want," Duncan said. "Together." They did exactly that. Over the following year, Duncan and Willow saved their money carefully. Duncan continued working for Mr. Carter, who promoted him to foreman after 6 months. Willow moved from housekeeping to working the front desk at the hotel, a position that came with better pay and more respect. Together, they managed to save enough to put a down payment on a small piece of land just outside Denver. It was not much, just 10 acres with a creek running through it and a small cabin that needed work. But it was theirs. They spent their evenings and weekends fixing up the cabin, repairing the roof, replacing broken windows, building furniture from scrap wood. It was hard work, but they did it together, and every nail Duncan hammered, every curtain Willow hung, felt like they were building not just a house but a home. A year and a half into their marriage, Willow discovered she was pregnant. She told Duncan over dinner one evening, her hands shaking slightly as she set down her fork. "I have something to tell you," she said. Duncan looked up from his plate, concern flickering across his face. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am fine. Better than fine, actually." She took a deep breath. "I am going to have a baby." Duncan's fork clattered to his plate. He stared at her, his eyes wide, his mouth opening and closing like he was trying to form words but could not quite manage it. "You are sure?" he finally managed. Willow nodded, a smile breaking across her face. "I am sure. The doctor confirmed it this afternoon. We are going to have a baby, Duncan." Duncan was out of his chair and around the table in an instant, pulling Willow to her feet and into his arms. He held her close, his face buried in her hair, and Willow felt him shake slightly. "Duncan, are you crying?" "Maybe," he admitted, his voice thick. "I just never thought I would have this. A wife, a home, a child. I thought I would spend my life moving from place to place, never putting down roots. And then you came along and changed everything." Willow pulled back to look at him, cupping his face in her hands. "You changed everything for me, too. You saved me, Duncan, in every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Duncan said, kissing her softly. Their son was born in the spring of 1880, a healthy baby boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. They named him James Duncan Cole, and from the moment he was placed in Duncan's arms, the cowboy was completely lost to fatherhood. He stared down at the tiny, squirming bundle with a look of such pure wonder and love that Willow fell in love with him all over again. Being parents was exhausting and terrifying, and the most wonderful thing either of them had ever done. Duncan would come in from working the land, covered in sweat and dirt, and immediately scoop up James, talking to him in a soft voice about the horses and the sky and how lucky they were. Willow would watch them, her heart so full it felt like it might burst, and marvel at how far they had come. When James was 2, they had another child, a daughter they named Sarah Ann. She had Willow's blonde hair and Duncan's stubborn streak, and she wrapped both her parents around her tiny finger from day one. Duncan built them a bigger house to accommodate their growing family, with the help of neighbors they had befriended, a 2-story structure with a wide porch and enough room for everyone. Their land prospered. Duncan started breeding horses, and his reputation for training good, steady animals spread throughout the territory. Willow kept a garden that became the envy of neighboring farms, and she sold her vegetables and preserves at the Denver market. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Duncan and Willow stood on their porch, watching James and Sarah play in the yard as the sun set behind the mountains. Duncan's arm was around Willow's waist and she leaned into him, perfectly content. "You ever think about that day in Black Hawk?" Willow asked quietly. "Sometimes," Duncan admitted. "Do you?" "Yes. I think about how terrified I was, how hopeless everything seemed. And then you appeared and everything changed in an instant." "Best decision I ever made," Duncan said, kissing her temple, "even though you had no idea what you were getting into, especially because of that." He turned her to face him, his eyes serious. "Willow, I want you to know something. That day, when I saw you on that platform, I told myself I was doing the right thing. And I was. But the truth is, you saved me just as much as I saved you. Before I met you, I was drifting, just going through the motions of living without really living. You gave me purpose, a reason to put down roots. You gave me a home." Willow felt tears prick at her eyes, happy tears this time. "We gave each other a home." Duncan kissed her slow and deep, pouring 5 years of love and gratitude and partnership into it. When they pulled apart, James was tugging at Duncan's pant leg. "Papa, can we have a story before bed?" Duncan scooped up his son, settling him on his hip while Willow picked up Sarah. "Of course. What story do you want tonight?" "Tell us about how you met Mama," James said, as he always did. It was his favorite story, the tale of the brave cowboy who rescued the beautiful woman from the bad men. Duncan glanced at Willow, and she smiled, nodding. "All right," Duncan said, carrying James inside while Willow followed with Sarah. "But you have heard this one 100 times." "I like it," James insisted. So Duncan told the story again, simplifying it for young ears, turning it into a tale of adventure and heroism. He told them about the town square and the angry crowd and how he knew he had to do the right thing no matter what. He told them about the journey to Denver and how he and their mother fell in love. He left out the darker parts, the fear and the desperation, saving those details for when they were older. As the children drifted off to sleep, Duncan and Willow stood in the doorway of their room, watching them breathe in the soft lamplight. "You think they will understand someday?" Willow asked. "How much we went through to get here, maybe," Duncan said. "Or maybe they will just grow up knowing they are loved and safe, and that will be enough." Willow leaned against him. "That is all I ever wanted for them. Everything I did not have. They have it. We made sure of that." They went to bed that night wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for the life they had built together. The road that had brought them to this point had been dark and frightening at times, but it had led them home. To each other, to their children, to a future full of possibility. Years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. James grew into a thoughtful, serious boy who loved working with his father and the horses. Sarah was wild and fearless, always climbing trees and challenging the boys in town to races. They had another child, a second son they named Thomas, and he became the family peacemaker, the one who could always make everyone laugh. Duncan's horse breeding business thrived, and eventually he was able to purchase more land, expanding their ranch. Willow's garden grew into a small orchard, and her preserves became so popular she started a small business selling them to stores in Denver. They prospered not because of luck, but because of hard work and determination, and the strength they drew from each other. On their 10th anniversary, Duncan surprised Willow with a trip back to Black Hawk. She had been hesitant at first, not sure she wanted to revisit that place and those memories. But Duncan insisted it was important. They left the children with a trusted neighbor and made the journey. Black Hawk had not changed much. The same buildings lined the same streets, though some new construction had sprung up to accommodate the growing mining industry. Duncan led Willow to the town square, to the spot where the auction platform had stood. It was gone now, torn down years ago. In its place was a small park with benches and a few trees. "Why did you want to come here?" Willow asked, her voice soft. Duncan took her hand. "Because I wanted you to see that it is just a place now. Not a nightmare, not a prison, just a place. You are not that scared woman on the platform anymore, Willow. You are strong and successful and loved. I wanted you to stand here and remember that you survived, that you thrived, that they did not break you." Willow felt tears stream down her face as she looked at the empty space where the platform had been. He was right. She was not that woman anymore. She had been forged in fire and had come out stronger on the other side. The fear and shame that had once consumed her were gone, replaced by confidence and joy and a deep, abiding love for the man standing beside her. "Thank you," she whispered. "For this, for everything." Duncan pulled her into his arms right there in the middle of the square. "Thank you for taking a chance on a dusty cowboy with more courage than sense." They stood there for a long time, holding each other in the place where their story had begun, both of them grateful for the journey that had brought them here. Before they left Black Hawk, they stopped by the sheriff's office. Sheriff Hammond was retired now, but his deputy told them the old lawman lived just outside town. They rode out to visit him, and Hammond greeted them with genuine warmth, delighted to see how well they had done for themselves. "I knew you two would be all right," Hammond said, pouring them coffee in his small but comfortable home. "I could see it that day in the square. You both had fight in you." "You helped save us," Willow said. "If you had not stepped in, that crowd might have turned violent." Hammond waved a hand dismissively. "I just did my job. You two did the hard part, building a life together from scratch." They stayed for an hour, sharing stories and catching up. When they left, Hammond walked them to their horses. "You ever hear what happened to Mercer?" Duncan asked. Hammond's expression darkened slightly. "He got caught running a swindling operation a few years back, lost everything and left town in disgrace. Last I heard, he was working as a manual laborer in some mining camp up north. Funny how things work out sometimes." Duncan nodded, feeling a grim satisfaction. Justice was not always swift, but sometimes it came around eventually. They rode back to Denver feeling lighter somehow, as if confronting the past had freed them from some weight they had not even realized they were carrying. The years continued to roll by. James grew into a fine young man, eventually taking over much of the day-to-day work on the ranch. Sarah shocked everyone by announcing she wanted to become a teacher, and she moved to Denver to attend a teaching college. Thomas found his calling working with numbers and became an accountant. Duncan and Willow watched their children grow and thrive with a fierce pride that never dimmed. On their 20th anniversary, Duncan and Willow took a trip, just the two of them, to a mountain cabin they had rented. They spent a week doing nothing but talking, walking through the woods, and enjoying each other's company without the constant demands of ranch life. One evening, they sat on the cabin porch, wrapped in a blanket as the mountain air grew cool. Stars spread across the sky above them, so bright and numerous they looked like scattered diamonds. "You have any regrets?" Willow asked suddenly. Duncan considered the question carefully. "About us? Not a single one. About other things, sure. I wish I had been able to give you an easier life, more luxuries." Willow shook her head firmly. "I do not want luxuries. I want exactly what I have. A man who loves me, children who are healthy and happy, a home that is filled with laughter. That is more than I ever dreamed I would have." "You deserve all of it and more," Duncan said, kissing her forehead. "What about you?" Willow asked. "Do you have regrets?" "Only that I did not meet you sooner," Duncan said. "I would have liked more years with you." "We still have plenty of years ahead," Willow pointed out. "Not enough." There could never be enough. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead, each lost in thoughts of the journey they had shared. From a dusty town square in Black Hawk to this mountain cabin, from strangers to soulmates, they had traveled a road neither could have predicted. But they had traveled it together, and that had made all the difference. As they grew older, Duncan and Willow settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch ran smoothly under James's management, giving Duncan time to focus on training special horses, the ones that came with problems no one else could solve. He had a gift for understanding animals, for seeing past their fear or aggression to the scared creature underneath. People came from all over the territory to have Duncan Cole work with their horses. Willow expanded her preserves business, eventually hiring help and selling her goods as far east as St. Louis. She became known for her apple butter and her strawberry preserves, and she took pride in every jar that went out bearing her label. But her favorite moments were still the quiet evenings on the porch with Duncan, watching the sun set over land they had claimed and tamed together. Their grandchildren started arriving, and Duncan and Willow fell into their roles as grandparents with enthusiasm. They spoiled the children outrageously, teaching them to ride and garden and telling them stories about the old days. The story of how Duncan and Willow met became family legend, passed down and embellished with each telling, though the core truth remained the same. A cowboy had seen an injustice and had chosen courage, and that choice had changed everything. On their 30th anniversary, the family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Children and grandchildren filled the house and yard, their laughter and noise a symphony of joy. Duncan and Willow sat at the head of a long table they had built years ago, looking at the faces surrounding them, seeing their legacy in every smile. James stood and raised his glass. "To my parents, who showed us what it means to fight for what is right and to love without reservation. You gave us the best childhood any kid could ask for, and now you are giving that same gift to your grandchildren. We love you both more than words can say." Everyone raised their glasses, echoing the sentiment, and Willow felt tears roll down her cheeks. Duncan squeezed her hand under the table, his eyes suspiciously bright as well. After the dinner, when most of the guests had gone home and only their children remained, Sarah approached her parents. She had something in her hand, a book bound in leather. "I have been working on something," she said, handing it to Willow. "I thought you should have it." Willow opened the book and gasped. It was their story, all of it, written in Sarah's careful script. From the auction block to the ride to Denver to their wedding to the birth of each child, Sarah had documented their lives in beautiful, loving detail. "Sarah, this is amazing," Willow breathed. "I wanted to make sure the true story was preserved," Sarah explained. "Not just the legend we tell the kids, but the real story. The fear and the courage and the love. I wanted future generations to know what you two went through and how you built this life despite everything." Duncan took the book, paging through it carefully, his calloused fingers gentle on the paper. "You did this for us." "Of course I did. You are the best people I know. Your story deserves to be told." That night, after everyone had finally gone home or to bed, Duncan and Willow sat together reading Sarah's book by lamplight. They took turns reading passages aloud, laughing at some memories, getting misty-eyed at others. When they reached the end, they sat in silence for a long moment. "We had quite a journey, did we not?" Duncan said finally. "The best journey," Willow agreed. "I would not change a single step, even the hard ones. They all led us here." "Here," Duncan repeated, looking around at the home they had built, at the life they had created. "Yeah. Here is pretty damn good." They went to bed that night holding each other close, grateful for every moment they had been given, every challenge they had overcome, every joy they had shared. More years passed, and Duncan and Willow grew old together, their hair turning gray, their steps slowing but their love never diminishing. They celebrated 50 years of marriage surrounded by 3 generations of family, a testament to the life they had built from the ashes of despair. When Duncan was 75 and Willow was 67, they sat together on their porch as they had done thousands of times before, watching another Colorado sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Duncan's hand found Willow's, their fingers interlacing with the ease of long practice. "I have loved you since the moment I saw you," Duncan said quietly, "and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I know," Willow said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I have always known, just like you have always known I love you the same way. We did good, did we not? With our lives, with our family, we did better than good. We did wonderful." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting everything in soft twilight. Somewhere in the house, they could hear their grandchildren playing, their laughter floating out through open windows. The ranch stretched out before them, prosperous and peaceful, a kingdom they had built with their own hands and hearts. Duncan Cole and Willow Vance had started with nothing but courage and hope. They had faced down angry mobs and uncertain futures. They had worked until their hands bled and their backs ached. They had weathered storms, both literal and metaphorical. And through it all, they had loved each other with a fierce, unwavering devotion that had become the foundation of everything good in their lives. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Duncan kissed Willow's temple, a gesture he had made 10,000 times before and would make 10,000 times more if he was lucky. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For trusting me that day. For taking a chance on a dusty cowboy with more courage than sense. For building this life with me." Willow smiled, tilting her face up to kiss him properly. "Thank you for seeing me as a person when everyone else saw property, for being brave when it mattered most. For choosing me, every single day for 50 years. Easiest choice I ever made." They stayed on that porch until the stars filled the sky and the night grew cool, two people who had found each other against impossible odds and had built an empire of love. Behind them was a history of struggle and triumph. Around them was a family that loved them fiercely. Before them stretched whatever years remained, and they would face those years as they had faced everything else, together. The story that had begun on an auction block in Black Hawk, Colorado, with an act of desperate courage, had become a love story for the ages. And as Duncan and Willow Cole sat together under the stars they had wished upon for 5 decades, they knew that every hardship, every sacrifice, every moment of fear had been worth it, because it had led them here, to this porch, to this life, to each other. And that was the happiest ending anyone could ask for.